The Pyramid of Sekhemkhet was of a grand design, located to the southwest of the Step Pyramid. Everything about its design suggests that the monument was envisaged to build upon the example of the first pyramid and surpass it both in scale and style. But unfortunately, possibly due to his period of reign being shorter than Djoser's, the Pyramid of Sekhemkhet was never actually completed. Far from dwarfing the Step Pyramid, the unfinished masterpiece instead barely progressed above ground level, earning it a less flattering nickname in the years to come, the Buried Pyramid. The fact that the Buried Pyramid literally did not get off the ground meant that it was not even discovered until the middle of the 20th century. The Buried Pyramid lay unnoticed until 1951, when Egyptologist Zachariah Goneim spotted a rectangular rise on the ground a few hundred meters to the southwest of the Step Pyramid. Irregularities in the ground often signal that there is an archaeological feature beneath, and a visitor to any of the large Egyptian sites will see several intriguing lumps and hills. The problem is that until they are excavated, it is difficult to know if they are features of interest or rubbish spoils from previous excavations, and sometimes simple sand dunes can look irritatingly like archaeological features until someone starts digging into them. Another problem is that sites like Saqqara are so vast that many features have never been investigated for lack of time and manpower. What Goneim found when he excavated was the base of a step pyramid that had only been completed up to its first course. The pyramid measures 120 meters to a side, and calculations extrapolating from the existing base indicate it would have been 70 meters tall with 7 steps if finished, making it taller than Djoser's pyramid. Sadly, it ended up only reaching 7 meters. The pyramid was surrounded by an enclosure wall 5.18 meters high and 18.28 meters thick. The enclosure wall encompassed a large area measuring 518 meters on the north-south axis and 182.8 meters on the east-west axis. The enclosure wall had many niches and false doors, and in one spot the name Imhotep is inscribed. This hints that the same architect who built the step pyramid of Djoser might have worked on this one. Imhotep may have wanted to outdo himself. On the north side of the unfinished pyramid is a descending passage leading to the tomb beneath the pyramid. This had been completed and used, so it appears that the pyramid was halted after the pharaoh died, a fate that befell many pyramids and tombs. The tomb was mostly plundered in antiquity, but numerous artifacts had been left behind, including papyri, stone vessels, and bones from animal offerings. The tomb robbers also missed a wooden casket filled with gold jewelry, cosmetic cases, beads, and several jars with the name of the pharaoh on them. Behind a blocked wall was an undecorated chamber with a large alabaster sarcophagus sealed with mortar. Unfortunately, the sarcophagus turned out to be empty. Goneim was clear in his report that the sarcophagus had not been broken into, so why it was empty is a mystery. There is also an unusual U-shaped subterranean corridor that goes around the northern side of the pyramid, but beneath it, and it reaches a little more than halfway along the west and east sides. It contains a row of 136 unfinished galleries. Whether these would have contained statues, burials, or treasure is unknown, but it appears they were never stocked. In 1963, a second tomb to the south of the first one was discovered, similar to the south tomb of Djoser's mortuary complex. In it was a wooden coffin with the remains of a 2-year-old child and some fragments of gold leaf. This child was perhaps the son or daughter of Sekhemkhet. It could not be of Sekhemkhet himself, since he ruled for 6 years, and a relief in the Sinai shows him as an adult. The pharaohs of Dynasty 4 chose to build their pyramids elsewhere, most notably at Abusir, Giza, and Dashur. The exception to this was the last pharaoh of Dynasty 4, who not only chose to return to Saqqara, but built himself an old-style mastaba instead of a pyramid. Shepseskaf was the son of Menkaure, 2532 to 2504 BC, who built the third pyramid at Giza, and while it is smaller than those of Khufu and Khafre, it is still a grand monument, which makes it all the stranger why his son chose a relatively modest resting place. While historians have tried to explain these odd decisions, no one has come up with a reason for Shepseskaf turning his back on the Dynasty IV pyramid fields, or for building himself a mastaba. With that said, it is indeed a large one, measuring 96.6 by 74.4 meters, with a slope of 70 degrees. Its lowest course was red granite, while the rest of the casing was high-quality limestone. The entrance is on the north side, with a sloping passageway leading to a series of chambers, the westernmost being the burial chamber, which contained fragments of the sarcophagus. A small mortuary temple on the eastern side had a false door for the deceased's spirit, an offering hall and storage rooms, as well as an inner and outer courtyard. Both the mastaba and mortuary temple are surrounded by two mud-brick walls. The causeway and valley tomb for this mastaba survive, but have not been excavated. While Shepseskaf departed from tradition in many ways, he did continue the tradition found at Giza of having a stone causeway leading from the tomb to the valley where a temple was situated. It was at this valley tomb where a ship bearing the body was docked, and after the proper rituals were completed in the valley temple, the body was brought up the causeway to its final resting place. Saqqara is too far from the Nile for this kind of arrangement, but the annual flooding of the Nile left a series of lakes in the low valleys nearby. So the causeways of Shepseskaf's mastaba and the later Saqqara pyramids led down the valley temples on the shores of these lakes. No queen's tombs have been found around Shepseskaf's mastaba, an unusual omission for which there is no good explanation. Moreover, the choice of location is interesting, because Shepseskaf chose to place his mastaba in South Saqqara, where there are no prior royal burials. It remained the southernmost royal tomb for the entire site. Shepseskaf also finished his father's mortuary temple at Giza, although in a rather slapdash fashion, with mud brick rather than stone. Given that fact, it's possible that the extravagant spending in Dynasty IV had left the government either without the funds or the will to create giant monuments. That changed with the next dynasty, although pyramid building would never again reach the heights it had at Giza. Continued the tradition of being buried at Saqqara, and built a pyramid there, a little outside the northeast corner of Djoser's enclosure. Like the pharaohs who had preceded him, he sought to reinforce existing power structures and ensure his memory by commissioning a series of monumental works. This included a large mortuary complex, consisting of a mortuary temple, an offering chapel, and a cult pyramid. It also included his own pyramid, as well as a separate pyramid and a mortuary temple for his wife, Queen Neferhetipes. The pyramid complex of Userkaf was built around 2490 BC in the pyramid field at Saqqara. It was built directly to the northeast of the step pyramid, which had been commissioned by the pharaoh Djoser so many centuries earlier, but unlike the step pyramid, the style of the pyramids located within the complex followed the general design of their immediate predecessors. Constructed from dressed stone with cores made up from rubble, the pyramids were situated in a complex of larger size, using different architecture and locations for the interior compared to those that had most recently come before it. In a sense, the Saqqara location was both new and old, as it brought pyramid construction back to the site of the step pyramid, a place that had not been used for pyramid complexes since. The main pyramid of Userkaf reached a height of nearly 175 feet, with a base of over 200 feet following its completion. Like the Great Pyramid of Giza, the sides of the pyramid ascended upward at an angle of 53 degrees, and roughly hewn blocks of local limestone were used to build up a step-like rubble core for the center of the pyramid. A rubble core meant less work during the construction phase, but as the outer shell was cannibalized for other projects and the high-quality Tura limestone was taken, the inner core was exposed to weathering and erosion. Thus, during the reign of Ramses II, some 1500 years after the construction of the pyramid complex of Userkaf, it underwent some restoration works. The complex was also used during the Sate period as a cemetery, sometime between 664 and 525 BC. The ongoing removal of the limestone exterior meant that the rough rubble interior continued to degrade over time, and the main pyramid of Userkaf was eventually left in ruins. Today there is little left to mark its existence, apart from a conical hill in the pyramid field at Saqqara. The pyramid came to be known locally as El Haram El Mahabish, heap of stone, due to its dilapidated state of repair. The Pyramid of the Queen was likewise ruined by the same process, leaving its funerary chamber exposed and leaving the once grand pyramid resembling nothing more than a mound of rubble. Excavation was undertaken at the complex by a variety of archaeologists, from Orazio Marucchi as early as 1831 through to John Shea Perring and Richard Lepsius. Identification of the commissioning pharaoh was determined when a colossal red granite head of Usaqaf was identified in the archaeological deposit at the site. Despite a grand design and intentions toward longevity, the pyramid complex of Usaqaf is a lesson about the effects of time and the ravages of those that followed, with the impressive pyramids of the past ultimately reduced to rubble and sand. Usaqaf was a major patron of the sun cult, and in the layout of his mortuary area he changed the location of his mortuary temple from the east of the pyramid, where they were usually located for previous pyramids, to the south. Some Egyptologists theorize this was so the temple would catch the sun's rays all day long. In the same vein, religious texts from the period show an increased emphasis on sun worship related to the honoring of a deceased pharaoh. Offerings would go through a ritual of consecration at a sun temple before being offered to the dead pharaoh at the mortuary temple. Other scholars give a more mundane reason for the unusual placement of the temple, saying that a moat ran around Djoser's complex, and thus there was no room for the mortuary temple to be built in the traditional place. The mortuary temple, although in a poor state of preservation, must have been grand. A massive granite head of the pharaoh was found there, and it is calculated that the entire statue would have stood 5 meters tall. Fragments of relief from the walls are of high quality, and show boats going through swamps of papyrus reeds. While a few sculpture fragments survive from this mortuary complex, little else remains, and the pyramid is too ruined to enter. The exterior was removed at some time in the past for use in later construction, leaving the vulnerable core to erode and collapse until it became the rather unassuming heap it is today. But its proximity to the mortuary complex of Djoser, who was revered in ancient times, must have added to its luster. Also, unlike the large pyramids at Giza, Usaqaf's pyramid does not have internal chambers. Rather, the burial chambers were first dug into the bedrock, roofed over, and the pyramid built on top. The entrance is from the pavement on the north side of the pyramid, rather than on the side of the pyramid itself, as was common in pyramids of the previous dynasty. The entrance passage slopes down, heading south under the pyramid for 18.5 meters. 2 portcullises of red granite block the hallway to keep out tomb robbers, although, like with the other pyramids, this effort was in vain. At the end of the tunnel was a small network of rooms for Usaqaf's burial and grave goods. Little was found, except for a chest that once contained the canopic jars that once held the pharaoh's internal organs, and fragments of the basalt sarcophagus. At the southwest corner of Usaqaf's mortuary complex is a small cult pyramid. These are a common feature next to the pyramids, and appear never to have been intended to house a burial. Just what they were for is a matter of debate. Many believe they housed the pharaoh's ka, his spirit or vital essence. The cult pyramid once stood 15 meters high, 21 meters to a side, and had a 53-degree angle. Usually the cult pyramid is to the southeast of the main pyramid, but in the unusual layout of Usaqaf's mortuary complex, it is to the southwest. It is in a poor state of repair, and little remains today. A smaller mortuary complex for his queen, Neferhetepes, stands 10 meters to the south of Usaqaf's mortuary complex. This pyramid was quarried so extensively for stone that its inner chambers have been revealed. Nevertheless, enough remains to calculate that it once stood around 17 meters tall and 26.25 meters to a side, with an angle of 52 degrees. A small mortuary temple stood to the east, but is in poor condition. There is no evidence of a cult pyramid, but considering how much the entire site had been removed for later building, it may have disappeared entirely. Records show that Prince Khemweset, one of the sons of Ramses II, 1279 to 1212 BC, restored the pyramid complex of Usaqaf, but by the Third Intermediate Period, It had fallen into disrepair, and the temples were partially dismantled. During Dynasty 26, 664 to 525 BC, it became a cemetery. In fact, one large shaft tomb cut right through Userkaf's mortuary temple. The next pyramid to be built at Saqqara has only recently been identified. Just to the northeast of the pyramid of Teti stands a pyramid that was extensively quarried in later years, so much so that it has been dubbed the Headless Pyramid. Egyptologists were divided over whether this was the resting place of the Dynasty 5 king Menkauhor, 2422 to 2414 BC, or the later king Merikare of Dynasty 10, circa 2050 BC. It wasn't until excavations in 2008 by famous Egyptian researcher Zahi Hawass revealed a substructure typical of Dynasty 5 pyramids. No inscriptions were found, but now most scholars believe the pyramid to be that of Menkauhor. No other Dynasty 5 pharaohs had an unidentified pyramid, so it stands to reason that Hawass's hypothesis is correct. The pyramid measures 52 meters to a side, but is too fragmentary to determine its original height or angle. The substructure had been looted in antiquity, and little other than a broken sarcophagus lid was found. Its ancient name, which we know from texts found elsewhere, was the Divine Places of Menkauhor. Menkauhor's successor, Djedkare-Isesi, 2414 to 2375 BC, built a pyramid on a high spur at the southern edge of the Saqqara Plateau that is now little more than a heap of rubble resembling a large sand dune. Originally it stood 52 meters high, measured 78.75 meters to a side, and had an inclination of 52 degrees. Its ancient name was Beautiful is Isesi. The burial chamber was guarded by 3 large portcullises, blocking the entrance passage, but robbers circumvented these, stole the burial goods, and stripped the burial chamber of its decorated lining blocks. The black basalt sarcophagus was smashed. A mummy was found amid the ruins, presumably that of the pharaoh himself. The man was aged around 50, indicating that Djedkare-Isesi had still been in his teens when he ascended the throne. The pyramid had an associated mortuary temple, cult pyramid, and Queen's Pyramid with its own mortuary temple and cult pyramid, all in a poor state, but offering up a few tantalizing finds, including high-quality reliefs and statuary. One interesting feature are the pylons flanking the entryway to the complex. This is an innovation that would see common use in later construction, most notably in famous temples such as Karnak. The Queen's Mortuary Complex stands to the northeast of Djedkare-Isesi's. Sadly, there is no record of the name of the Queen buried here. The associated Valley Temple has not been excavated. Djedkare-Isesi's mortuary complex broke new ground at Saqqara, as it was the first pyramid to be built south of the main area, a full 2 kilometers south of Djoser's mortuary complex. Djedkare-Isesi chose a prominent place to be buried, atop a piece of high ground that, at the time, had no surrounding monuments. Even today his pyramid remains quite visible, and local villagers call it the Sentinel. The issue of tomb robbing by this time was evidenced in the design of this pyramid structure. It incorporated 3 large portcullis slabs as countermeasures to such robbery. There is even documentary evidence recorded of these ancient thieves, such as one stating, "We went to rob the tombs in accordance with our regular habit, and we found the pyramid of King Sekhem Reshetui. We took our copper tools, and we broke into this pyramid through its innermost part. Then we broke through the rubble and found the pharaoh lying at the back of his burial place. The noble mummy was completely bedecked with gold, and his coffins were adorned with gold and silver inside and out, and inlaid with all sorts of precious stones." The punishment of this historic confessor is not on record, but punishments were known to be severe, including the mutilation of noses and ears. Sometimes the guilty party was placed on a stake. Even with harsh penalties for those caught, and the countermeasures Pharaoh Djedkare-Isesi added to his burial chamber, it all inevitably proved unsuccessful. By the time archaeologists came to examine the pyramid, its burial chamber had long ago been plundered. The most important of the many Dynasty 5 monuments at North Saqqara is the Pyramid of Unas, 2375 to 2345 BC, the last ruler of the dynasty. This complex is just southwest of Djoser's enclosure, and it is the first pyramid to be decorated inside with extensive hieroglyphic inscriptions. These were the so-called pyramid texts. As builders had done for many years, Ounas's construction crew liberally borrowed material from the nearest pyramid neighbor, Djoser's step pyramid. Furthermore, material from his complex was put to use in a new context by plugging holes and gaps in the wadi located immediately adjacent to Ounas's causeway. Ironically, and at least somewhat fittingly, the same kind of masonry plundering eventually took place on Ounas's pyramid as well, exposing the core and leading to its inevitable deterioration. Today, the once grand pyramid has been so severely weathered that it now looks more like a natural hill feature than a pyramid structure. The burial chamber was also plundered long ago, but when excavations took place, archaeologists found it still contained some remnants, including a skull, right arm and shin. Whether or not these body parts once belonged to Ounas is uncertain. The pyramid was originally 43 meters high and 57.75 meters to a side, with a 56-degree angle. Its ancient name was Perfect of the Places of Ounas. As with previous pyramids of this dynasty, it had a rubble core that became exposed when the exterior dressed stone was carted away. Some of the exterior stones have survived in situ, and an inscription on the south side tells how the pyramid was restored in Dynasty 19 by Khemwaset, the high priest of Memphis and son of Ramses II. Also in the burial chamber were the partial remains of a male mummy, presumably that of Ounas, although there is no proof of this. The pharaoh's consorts are buried in a series of mastabas to the northeast of the pyramid. The mortuary temple is nearly identical in layout to that of Djekkari Isesi, in that it has an entrance hall and then a columned hall flanked by storage rooms. Beyond this lay the inner temples with niches for statues and a sanctuary. It continued the innovation of pylons, although not on such a grand scale as Djekkari Isesi's temple. The causeway linking the pyramid of Ounas to the water is well preserved, and part of it has been restored to its original height, making it one of the more interesting features for modern visitors. It was roofed over except for a slit in the center to allow light in. The lively painted bas-reliefs show sailing ships, marketplaces, hunting scenes, and grim portrayals of a famine that apparently occurred during Ounas's reign. The Valley Temple had a complex floor plan and graceful granite columns with capitals in the shape of palm fronds. To the south of the causeway are two stone-lined boat pits, similar to those next to the pyramid of Khufu at Giza. Unlike the examples at Giza, no boats were found in these pits, and it is unclear if they were ever used or perhaps acted merely as symbols. While the exterior of the pyramid is somewhat unimpressive, it has one of the most archaeologically important interiors in all of Egypt. The burial chamber walls are covered in long vertical hieroglyphic inscriptions. Taken together, they are called the pyramid texts, and include 283 different spells to help the soul make it to the land of the dead. The soul was required to prove its worthiness and respond correctly to a series of monstrous guardians before having its heart judged to see if the soul was worthy of making it to the next world. Some of these spells were apparently recited at various points during the burial ceremony. This in turn led to the coffin texts being developed later in the Middle Kingdom period, and then the Book of the Dead from the New Kingdom era to the Ptolemaic period. This notion of magic inscriptions also played a part much later in history through pop culture's fixation on the idea that the pharaoh's mummies had curses. The idea that grave robbers and archaeologists suffered from these kinds of curses remains popular even today.